So let's get started. First, wanted to outline our agenda for today. As Haley said, the mega picture of today's event is the state of tech CI, what we're seeing as folks who participate in and support that ecosystem. There's three key areas that we want to focus on today. One is mega trends that we see across our client base, across the market, our peers more broadly for 2023 in CI. The second is diving a little bit deeper into the current state and speaking a bit about what we think that means for the future state as those mega trends take hold, and then providing some recommendations and looking around the corner to what's next for CI pros teams in light of those mega trends and those current state, future state issues that we see around CI as a function, a practice, a way of being. So who am I? I lead the Tailored Services team here at TBR. Tailored Services is our group that leads all of our custom competitive intelligence research efforts. I am also a avid industry watcher and vested interest in all things CI, and so I've been deeply researching that on behalf of TBR and on behalf of our clients. So getting into the content, what are the mega trends that we see in CI for 2023? I think the first mega trend is really about the most important part of CI, which is the value of competitive intelligence as a function, whether it's at a vendor serving that function at a firm like TBR, supporting folks in that function, or as a practice generally. We believe CI is on a path to must-have and is currently in the state of an important to have function. We're drafting from our own research for that, as well as from our partners at Crayon. Crayon recently released their 2023 State of Competitive Intelligence report. And in that report, they asked about how impactful and critical CI as a function is to success. And this is looking broadly, not just in the tech sector. And they say there's been a 55% increase year over year in the how critical CI is to success. And there's a number of reasons that we believe are driving that we'll get into. What we find, however, is that much like product marketing as a function broadly, where CI often resides, and same with strategy, CI is often a target for when times are tough, to consolidate, to ask folks to do more with less. And so I think big picture, as we dig into megatrends, the most important trend or the most important topic to keep in mind is how does CI as a function, as a practice, evolve from something that's really important to have and a critical enabler of success to something that's a must-have. And we'll dig into each of kind of our ideas on that and what we're hearing and seeing as ways that you all and your peers are navigating that as we go through the presentation. So I'm going to start this presentation and maybe annoy you a little bit, but it is a trend we're seeing in this market. The current state that kind of outlines everything around about 2023 in CI is the mandate to do more with less. Our friend Brandon over at Clue recently had a LinkedIn post where he's not the only one, so I'm not picking on you, Brandon, saying do more with less is the overused mantra for 2023. Certainly not something that is solely an issue of CI's to rest on CI's shoulders, but it's something that's acutely felt among CI teams who are already asked very commonly to do more with less. And so do more, what can that mean? Cover more, deliver more data, deliver more insight on a broader and more diverse ecosystem of competitors and partners, address more ad hoc requests, support the field to a greater degree, because everything is focused on deal conversion, compression of sales cycle. CI is a critical enabler of the field in many cases, and so be ready to drop it all and support pursuits in the field. Create more deliverables to do that. Deliver out more insight to address a broader range of stakeholder audiences, be available on demand with the communication tools and platforms that are available. So not only delivering out a set of cadence outputs, but being a immediate kind of intelligence desk that can be drawn upon on demand, and then make sense of, process, execute all those things with a large and expanding volume of data, insight, and information that can be harvested for intelligence. So a lot of ask could do more, and then again with less, I think we all know it, we all see it, but it's materializing in our data sets as well. Teams are small, in some cases getting smaller, in some cases being completely broken apart and moved into business units or other functions. Budgets being compressed. I think in the Crayon research that we referenced a moment ago, pretty much everyone's saying headcount's staying the same, budgets are looking the same for non-FTE budget for CI functions for this year. And I think increasingly when you get your exec stakeholders who start firing off queries into ChatGPT, it's can't you do this with more technology, more automation to deliver more output, more value, create more assets with the same resources that you have on hand. So what's driving that do more with less mandate? We touched on a bit of these. The first two are interrelated. We see as an organization that tracks vendors, both for the purposes of competitive market and ecosystem intelligence, that there's a convergence of markets. My colleague Chris Antlitz, who leads our telecom practice, wrote in follow-up to his participation at Mobile World Congress about how the telecom ecosystem no longer belongs to the telecom vendors, the traditional telcos, given the influence and immersion of the hyperscalers in that space. So as a CI professional, you can no longer concern yourself with only your top and most direct competitors, or even your tier 2, 3 ankle biters. You must now deliver intelligence on an ecosystem that's either a partner or has a co-opetition relationship with you that's increasingly encroaching in your space, where you likely have less intelligence, less coverage, less former employees at your organization that you can draw on for insight as well. And I think anyone who looks at the MarTech sales tech landscape work that comes out from Chief MarTech knows that certainly in that ecosystem, but broadly across tech, competitive landscapes are expanding just within particular categories at a faster rate than ever before. Barriers to entry are lower, particularly in areas like B2B SaaS. And so there's just more competitors on radars. And couple that with convergence of ecosystems, convergence into new markets, and you're increasingly looking not at a list, but a web of different players that you need to get your arms around as an intelligence professional. And then information overload, or as we maybe more kindly put it here, democratization. There's more data available and more data being created every day than there ever has been before. There's technology that makes it easier, in theory, to process and collect that information, but that can quickly lead to a tipping of the scales when there's how do you find signal in the noise. We spoke to a CI professional at an organization that uses Gong, sales intelligence tool for primarily, at least in its original conceit, designed to help the field get better and learn from their calls and optimize that way. Really helpful and actionable tool for CI teams, as many of you likely know as well, whether you use Gong, Chorus AI, or another call recording and intelligence platform. But his point was, because we have this resource, there's hundreds and hundreds of outputs being generated from sales calls every week. And while that's really valuable in terms of a potential resource of insight on our competitors come up on sales calls, it can be increasingly hard as a small team or as a solo CI team member to actually find the valuable nuggets in the signal in that noise. And how do you do that? So there's the production of data and information is ahead of the ability to translate it into insight. So underneath that, the building blocks of that disruption, if you want to call it that, are 5 things that we see happening in the market. And these are some of the things we'll dig into in the remainder of this presentation. But change is a constant, whether that's org structure, layoffs happening across CI/MI teams, installation of new leadership, rebranding of organizations, repositioning of budget and where and what groups hold responsibility for different aspects of CI internally or with external partners. And so just a lot of change in terms of how the chairs are getting shuffled for organizations. Evolution of to that do more for less mandate, how CI gets consumed. Is it self-service? What's on demand? How much of that is being used and with what degree of value capture are self-service CI resources being used? Shadows CI/MI, nothing new, I think, probably to this group that is on here, but I think an accelerating challenge when you combine it with the others here, particularly new tech and new CI sources. So individuals buying seats to certain platforms outside of kind of the centralized CI/MI function to solve particular jobs because CI/MI doesn't exist in just a vacuum. Every element of the organization has a hand to play. It's just a question of how much it's then filters back and is centralized and managed that way or decentralized across the organization. The shadow is because it's the shadow, it can't be controlled. As I mentioned, new tech and platform and tools that may or may not be launched directly to support CI, but have a CI impact. The sales intelligence platforms like Gong and Chorus AI are great examples, as I shared, of what's emerging there. New resources that create new value, but potentially new challenges in how do you actually make sense of the amount of information you're generating. And then new CI sources. This is one where I think the more you pull the thread, the more you find. For example, TBR covers a market called Telecom Infrastructure Services and goes really deep on benchmarking vendor performance, pricing, go-to-market portfolio strategy, covering both wireless, wireline infrastructure for the full services cycle associated with deploying those networks. As you dig into that market and as you look at the information that's out there, you'll find there are CI resources that put out research that's only focused on counting the number of 5G wireless towers and tracking the architecture of those towers in the U.S. Or you might find that there's a resource that benchmarks solely the current market pricing for a fiber splice in 5 different countries. Point being, there's the kind of core CI providers and the core and boutique analyst firms that are supporting this work. And then there's a constellation of content sites, data platforms, market intelligence resources, 1, 2, 3-person CI shops. So there's so many resources gathering very specific and granular insight that for the CI professional, it becomes a challenge of how do you bring all those disparate and high value sources together into a single database, a single point to then transmit it out to your stakeholders in a way that, again, finds the signal and delivers the value they're looking for. So now pivoting, and I wanted to share, again, under the kind of big umbrella themes we have there, some of the metrics, the benchmarks we're seeing across our client base and more broadly, current state of CI in tech. So how do we do that? So I wanted to give you the who, what, when, where, how, why, and how. So we took a cross-section of 50 or so of our clients representing a diversity of all the major industries that we cover. Again, TBR covers, as most on the call likely know, markets such as telecom, professional services, management consulting, cloud, software, data center infrastructure, devices. So we took a cross-section across those organizations, representing effectively hundreds of thousands of employees, billions of dollars in revenue that those firms generate, and took a look at, from our knowledge, having interviews with our client-facing team, just from our regular interactions with those groups, and just looking at the industry broadly, from our experience kind of supporting these teams, things like reporting structure, headcount, third-party vendor ecosystems, tools, technologies, deliverables, and the demand they're seeing for CI and MI. So now digging into some of the data that we found in doing that survey, I think our audience skews to a larger and more established CI organization. 70%. I think if you look at the Crayon research, they ask similar questions on state of CI, and they find that 30% perhaps of their survey base, CI is part of someone's role, and it's not a formal and dedicated function. In our case, 70% do have a dedicated function, typically reports into a strategy, sales, or AR team more broadly. These functions, even at the large organizations that we're looking at, are typically pretty small. 50% have fewer than 10 full-time employees focused on CIMI, and then 60% of those have fewer than 5. So we're talking very commonly. There are exceptions, of course. There's the other half that are really large and established organizations, but most, even at that level of, as I mentioned, thousands of employees and billions of dollars, teams of two pizza teams of 5 or 10 that are supporting CI for the entirety of their organization. What we're hearing, seeing, tracking for changes for this year, like Crayon, we're not seeing a lot on kind of major changes to headcount or reporting structure. We're hearing mostly, as they said, staying the same, steady as she goes, do more with less is the remit. For the smaller side of the firms that we have visibility into, some are getting more formal, branding CI as a formal function. Not to say they haven't had CI out of some other organization, part of their organization, but formalizing it, adding leadership to help formalizing it. We are hearing some restructuring as well, whether it's shifting the reporting, specializing the team in a different way, bringing together CI resources from other groups and pooling into a centralized team. No real, I'd say, through line or single kind of everyone's restructuring in this way. More like nip and tuck type changes happening to organizations as they try and navigate budgets and uncertainty and make sure that they're delivering their committed level of CI that their stakeholders have come to expect. Deliverables, again, I think steady as she goes here in terms of the what. So we break CI deliverables into kind of 3 categories. There's ad hoc, and I won't go through each of these, but things like anything that's reactive to the field and intended to enable the field to pursue competitive wins. Programmatic, I'm sure most on the call are familiar with those. Those are typical profiles, reports, newsletters, the core assets around CI that are disseminated out on a proactive and cadence basis to distribute competitive insight to the organization, and then project-based around CI usually partnering with marketing, product teams, sales teams, other parts of the organization around specific initiatives that require deeper competitive insight to inform some type of decision, whether it's, hey, we're thinking about resetting our pricing and we want to understand the competitive environment, or we want to benchmark the customer satisfaction of our peers so we can use that and translate that into marketing and enablement assets and collateral. So in terms of the core tools, not seeing a lot of change. I think where we're seeing some change is the demand for quality of those and the leveling up of those and unique approaches that maybe some smaller companies are taking to those. I mentioned we've heard a lot from smaller companies that are trying to infuse more voice of customer into their assets, whether it's a clip of a gong call directly, a link out to a Slack thread, those types of activations that are intended to be more organic and more kind of direct from market than perhaps a more formal newsletter or something. Doesn't replace just a strategy and a style. And then I think, again, the idea of doing more for less, the quality and the expectation of the so what and getting more out of these types of resources is what we're hearing more so than any type of wholesale change in the resources themselves. I think when you think of consumption model, and I mentioned self-serve earlier, and the degree to which organizations are moving to self-serve CI versus being still primarily a reactive field support function. I think it really depends on who the primary stakeholder audience is. So I think the change here is more kind of one of where we're at. So when there's more intensity on the field to generate revenue in a market environment like this, then the importance of reactivity and flexibility in delivery and consumption increases. But overall, it's really about who CI supports. Are they a field function that's supporting that? Are they primarily for executives or business unit leadership? I think those kinds of org design decisions drive how they're evolving around delivery and consumption more so than anything that's a trend line in the market today. So what are factors that influence that? Obviously, depending on audience, the speed of delivery. If it's chasing an RFP, a competitive RFP, that's a lot quicker than the need to deliver a recurring quarterly competitor profile update. Cadence of delivery goes hand in hand with that. Is it ad hoc and event driven like a sale, or is it more recurring, programmatic, and to be proactive in that nature? Is it, again, self-service and inviting folks in, and to what degree is that being used versus is it a push? The CEO has this question and it needs an answer today. And then I think in this maybe part org decision and part audience is what are the channels through which CI is consumed? Is it formal? Is it through, I think if you look at the Crayon survey once again, or other surveys like Clue and others have done in the past, email it remains supreme as how most stakeholders want to consume. But I think depending on your organization, maturity, way of working, that changes. You see, I think a lot of folks talking about the value they or the activation success they see when they have built a competitive insights channel for Slack for their company, and it's being updated with resources added while they're out on PTO or over the weekend. And so I think that's a mindset and a structure difference for smaller programs and programs that embrace that way of working more so than large organizations who are still structured around email-based, cadenced delivery of their resources out to the team. And part of that too is ways of working with third parties that might be providing intelligence services as well, and how they connect into whatever platform resource that you might be or may not be using for CI. So speaking of, one thing we look at, not surprisingly, is the landscape of third parties that are providing services into the CI/MI organizations of vendors. So typically we see anywhere from 10 to 20. Again, that's a derivative of our audience audience in the ecosystem we look at. Smaller companies likely going to be more. Larger companies, or the largest, could be at the top of that range or higher. Why would you use multiple vendors? Number of different reasons. I think most, again, probably know these, but we heard it in this research. It's specialization around topic that supports different stakeholder audiences, has different levels of buyer influence for messaging the market, the methodologies and capabilities that are used, diversifying supplier risk, preferences that are latent in the ways you work with third parties, and the way you like to engage those third parties, their delivery models, how they manage engagements or research that they deliver, the pricing structures that they might use, and then just diversification of insight, the ability to validate the outputs of one versus another. Where we see and hear changes coming for this year as it relates to kind of this augmentation ecosystem for CI is more and more and more and more specialization, whether it's, again, through those smaller CI and analyst services organizations or through looking for more specialization in concierge data and insights out of the vendors you already use. Just the ability to outsource and do more with less and get more value from a third party than hiring and onboarding another CI resource at your team to do the same. So just being able to leverage and scale your team. And then one thing we're experiencing directly is new types of commercial models for consumption of competitive research and projects, whether it's making sure that there's external usage rights available to then translate competitive insight into marketing enablement collateral, or something that's kind of less the traditional subscription model for competitive research and more kind of pay on demand, pay per use. Those types of kind of, again, in the do more for less environment, how do you align consumption of CI services, insights, data, whatever it may be, to the output and the value that you capture from it. All of these changes are in that vein of laddering up quality, laddering up value, and then aligning expense to the value. So we've touched on technologies and tools a bit. The big, I think, through line is pretty much everyone has either built or bought everyone that we evaluated has built or bought a CI platform. That's kind of the hub of CI insight. So when we say CI platform, we mean Crayon, Clue, Common Tele, others of that ilk. And then, of course, many have built their own, either building from a white label platform or building truly homegrown, their own CI platform. Many of these plug into vendors like TBR or others that have their own platforms, like us with our Insight Center, and pull data, pull insight from that, add reports, content from that into their own tools to then enrich, expand, extract. So I think the norm is CI platform in the various resources that plug into it. As I mentioned, one that is emerging, we've heard at least, is sales intelligence tools like Gong. Again, I talked about that example of too much of a good thing, and then how do you process, analyze, index, and be able to search those insights from that sales intelligence. So that's an opportunity for technology and also a challenge. We heard from that individual who I mentioned. They essentially have built an Airtable database and try and clip and tag insights as best they can and manage it that way. But there's just a large library of transcribed calls sitting there, which goes to my next point, which is I think it's no surprise that there's a conversation starting around ChatGPT and AI more broadly and its impact on the life cycle of analysis, intelligence, and insight that we've outlined here. My opinion, I won't speak for my colleagues except for maybe Patrick Heffernan, who leads our services team, and I know where he stands on ChatGPT. But we see it as a co-pilot and an ability and an enabler of what we call shifting right across this phase from collection to process to analysis to activation. We think it's going to open up. We do here at the firm 1,000+ in-depth interviews a year to support our research, and so the effort to find, recruit, process, transcribe, extract insight from those interviews, it can take hours and hours per interview to execute that process. So having a platform in place to make all of that insight searchable, to summarize interviews, to find commonalities of theme across those interviews, just using interviews as an example, those types of use cases are going to allow the CI personnel to certainly not be replaced, but to work more effectively and efficiently through the collect and process phase, and even in some cases, the analyze phase, so they can continue to shift right toward activating those with their stakeholders. So now onward to kind of what's next, and I think we've talked about that a little bit throughout the presentation as well. I just said we think, again, bringing it back to the top, our conversation around making CI a must-have for organizations, shifting right from collection and just inputting to outputting and outcomes, increasing the value of those outcomes, and then being able to measure it, we think are three areas that I think the point here is the value creation is already warranting CI as a must-have, but it's more about communication, activation, measurement to make sure that organizations more broadly see that and understand that. So I just spoke to this a bit, but again, I think everyone knows the degree to which you can shift right in the CI process to analyzing and activating is where the most value is created. So not to discount the importance of collecting and processing, but that's where automation, new technologies, platforms, the support of third-party vendors make collecting, collating data and insights on competitors more efficient and effective. I think an opportunity here is as the baseline efforts, whether it's extracting competitive information from a 10K or reporting on earnings or gathering the latest news on acquisition, it makes those baseline activities more efficient. So the effort and the goal around that, the collect and process phase, should be to find new sources to add additional incremental value at the top of the funnel in those phases, whether it's primary insight from customers, whether it's building a community of your customers and then having CI layer into that community to extract insight from those customers. The more time that can be spent on gathering from the market and from the voice of the customer in that phase, or novel insight that third parties can generate from customers and other resources, it's going to make the later stages more actionable and valuable. So again, the idea is to spend more time in analysis, derive novel insights from being able to apply analysis in new ways, and then iterating, activating, just shipping insight more to the audience, your audience of stakeholders, being able to spend more time there versus more time just getting to the point of building a newsletter, and then being able to have enough resource capacity among the team to embrace the ad hoc support that's being slowed down from the sales team, address it faster, more completely, as a way of building trust in the process overall. So I started touching on this a little bit around baseline versus value add collection. So we think it's a pyramid of insight that can be extracted, starting with publicly available data, collecting, collating, transmitting, summarizing that as the bottom. Then you move up to what we call Internet Sawdust. I stole that from Anand, who runs the company's CB Insights. But it's essentially messy data that's public, whether it's review sites, social forums, finding something in a PDF that's public, pricing schedule, government pricing schedule. It's out there, but it's messy and needs more time to organize and structure. That's the next layer of insight. And then you get into higher and higher value insight, including internal insights. So talk to ex-employees of a competitor that are at your company, running your win-loss data from your CRM, talking to sales, and then external insight from the market that's completely unbiased, whether it's analyst insights and research or at the top of the pyramid, external primary insights from buyers, whether it's your own buyers or churned lost customers or buyers that are in your ideal customer profile that may use a competitor and may not use the solution today. Moving up this pyramid, finding ways through time and effort to focus on the top of the pyramid allows you to optimize for collecting higher value insight. If you collect higher value insight, then you can find novel ways to analyze and activate those insights, meaning, again, my example of if you're able to spend that time on those 100 sales calls a week, you can find more signal around directly at the client insights on competitors, and then use the tool you're using, whether it's Gong or something else, to extract and deliver them to your stakeholders in new ways. And then the last leg of that stool, and one that's really important and one that we're going to be doing a deeper dive piece on soon, is the idea of then being able to measure that value. I spent a lot of my time doing pricing research on behalf of TBR and pricing advisory. When we think about pricing, there's this concept of value metrics, which is really a value metric is the metric that tracks how your product or service delivers value to your customers. Successful pricing focuses on structuring pricing that tracks your value metric. So if you create value for your customer when they add more leads to their CRM, then if you have a monetization strategy that can measure how many leads they're generating and the value of those leads, and you price your product per lead, then you can articulate the price for value effectively that your product provides. I think applying that kind of value metric, value measurement concept to CI is something that is a significant opportunity to elevate the must-have-ness, to use a not word, of CI as a function. So when we think about value and measurement of value, we break it into three buckets. One is input-based, the next is output-based, and the third is outcome-based. So input-based, think of these are kind of the cost centers that make up your CI function. So how many team members you have, how many analyst partners you're working with, the number of data sources you're pulling together, how many requests you field on a quarterly or annually basis. These all kind of define what you are, what are the inputs that go to your function, but they don't really speak much to what you're creating. It's what you're taking in. What speaks to what you're creating is typically output-based metrics, whether it's you produce this many reports, there are this many downloads, you address this many of those requests you received on time, you did this many meetings to activate CI, you supported X% of deals. Again, we speak to the work activity of the CI team, but they don't necessarily speak to what the outcomes were of that work. And that's where outcome-based measures come in. Competitive win rate, that was cited as the top KPI that's tracked in Crayon's State of CI survey. The revenue from those competitive wins, the length of the sales cycle, is your activity compressing the sales cycle? How satisfied are your stakeholders with what you've produced and delivered? And how much is your content engaged upon in customer-facing presentation. Again, not an exhaustive list, but the idea is if you can define metrics for your organization that focus on the outcomes you deliver, A, and B, can measure the success and benchmark those, but not only say the competitive win rate is X, but translate that to an attributable revenue that the team is supporting or cost that the team is eliminating through CI efforts. That's where value measurement really starts to come into focus. I think most organizations, and I put TBR from our portal and how we deliver research today in that camp, are in the middle on output-based and thinking about outcomes, but don't measure because they can be really hard to measure in a justifiable, objective way. If you think of something like competitive win rate, sure, you can go out and do a calculation from your Salesforce data and say, we're winning X percent of competitive deals with at least one competitor involved. And you could go out and do a cohort analysis of here's how it looks for this territory, this business unit or product or service or this one. And that gives you an understanding of over time, if you look at that metric, how well you're doing on competitive wins overall. What it doesn't really tell you though is how much of a hand CI is having in the support or the performance of that metric, because someone could argue, oh, that was a competitive win, but our sales guy was college buddies with the client, and so it's really more about that the battle cards that were built. And so taking it one step even further and finding ways to measure impact and outcome within these measures, I think is where, again, I believe wouldn't be in this business if I didn't, that it is a must-to-have and the value is being delivered. I think navigating, obviously a challenging and difficult thing to do, but navigating and steering the organization to measures of quantifiable value of CI outcomes is where leaders will start to emerge in terms of being able to build and invest in new CI technology, people, processes. So last thing to note, that was a very quick flyover, touched on a bit of data. We have a white paper that we put together with the findings of the research effort that went behind all this. So do invite you to, the link is in the webinar console to go and grab that paper should you be interested in going much deeper. The other thing to do is just send us a note. This is stuff we like to talk about, stuff we look at all the time. And so that's all available as another resource to you. And so with that, we'll open it up to any questions. So please do throw any into the chat or the Q&A function. We do have an initial question. It says, what's the single most unique or different change in CI/MI orgs that TBR has observed this year? It's a good one, because I feel like a lot of this presentation was me saying, yeah, it's kind of the same as before. Everyone knows this kind of thing. And while I do think that's true, I would say, and maybe this is a cop-out answer, but I think the do more with less-ness is it really is shining through in every conversation we have, in every interaction with folks like yourselves and others that are leaders of these functions. We're looking to push through this big pricing transformation, and we need market insight to support this, but also our budgets are compressed, and so we're looking at ways to stitch together this study, and perhaps do X, Y, Z. So I think just the market environment is driving a lot more, whereas things would have spun out into large projects or longer term initiatives. It's compressing everything down to a much more agile and kind of, okay, we have this big challenge in CI. This could be a really nice, big project, or we could build a large financial model to explore this, but how do we ship something that helps our stakeholders in a week and start to build from there? So we're finding more and more taking big ideas, big CI challenges, and cracking them out into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different phases that build upon one another is kind of a unique or different engagement model. Not to say that doing that hasn't happened before, but just the frequency of that and wanting to be more agile, fluid, even at large, established 20+ person CI orgs is something we're seeing more and more regularly.